to CrabCon 2024. Today I want to go over a few things I think are very important for you to have as you start your hermit crab journey. Now, if you're like me, you're most likely starting out with a hermit crab that you purchased at a beach shop, a pet store, or even won them at a carnival. Now, a lot of people don't know that hermit crabs can live over 40 years in captivity. Now, this is only if they are properly cared for. Now, these locations where we are purchasing these hermit crabs, they're most likely giving us care guides or instructions on how to set them up. But to be honest, a lot of that information isn't accurate. We want to make sure that we have everything they need so when we bring these guys home, we can set them up properly. So before we go into the details on what they need, today my talk is titled All About the Basics Hermit Crab Care 101. So let's dive in. So as we bring these little guys home, we're most likely bringing them in a critter keeper or even those mesh cages. Now, those are not suitable homes for our hermit crabs. One reason being that they do have modified gills. That just means that they need a certain amount of moisture in order to breathe properly. So we want to make sure that they don't have to struggle. So how do we establish that in our hermit crab's new enclosure? Now, what they're going to need to start with is a glass aquarium tank with a glass lid. Now, we want, like I mentioned, a completely sealed tank so the glass lid will hold all the heat and the humidity our hermit crabs need. Now, how big of a tank you're going to need will all depend on how many hermit crabs you have and how big they are. Now, our recommendations are based off of mold space. So we want to make sure that we have a tank that's big enough for them to safely molt. In order for our hermit crabs to grow, they need to molt. And in order for them to do that safely, they do need to fully submerge under the substrate to shed their exoskeleton. So we know that they're going to live a long time and they're going to grow. So we want to make sure that they have what they need. Now, our recommendations are 10 gallons for every small to medium hermit crab and 15 gallons for every large to jumbo hermit crab. Now, if you just have one hermit crab, the minimum size tank is a 20 gallon. So here you will see this is a regular glass fish tank with a glass hinge lid on the floor. Now, you can find these tanks in different locations, different platforms. It all depends on what you have access to and what you can afford. Now, you can either find them at Petco, PetSmart, Craigslist, or even Facebook Marketplace. I'm sure there are other resources as well. Now, you want to make sure that you are getting a completely sealed tank, so you will need some sort of lid. If your tank does not come with a lid, you can get these hinge lids either at Petco or even on Amazon. There's also an option where you can get plexiglass or even customly cut glass at your local hardware store. If for some reason your tank comes with a mesh lid, you want to make sure you seal that. You can seal it with plastic wrap, press and seal, even cardboard or even styrofoam. The idea is to seal the lid so that all the humidity and the moisture stays inside the tank. So now let's talk about a light source. Now we want to offer our hermit crabs a light source. Now we want to make sure that we're staying away from any heat lamps. Heat lamps may create hot spots on the substrate and could potentially harm our hermit crabs. So we want to make sure that we're sticking to natural lighting. We want to be able to mimic what they get out in the wild. So we're looking for a 12-hour daylight cycle and 12 hours of complete dark. So just white lights. There are different options out there that you can use. For example, depending on what you have access to and what you can get at the moment, you can place your tank in a room in your home where you get a lot of natural lighting. You want to make sure that you are not placing your tank anywhere that it's going to get direct sunlight. We want to avoid the tanks overheating. Now there is another option where you can place a desk light next to your hermit crab tank, turn it on during the day and turn it off at night. UVB lights can also be used as well, but to get the full function of a UVB light, it does need to be placed inside the tank at the highest point of the tank away from your hermit crabs so they don't burn themselves. If you want to just use it as a light source, you can place it on the top of your glass lid as well. Now this is my personal favorite. These are Hogger lights and they have different functions to them. I personally like the daylight cycle setting, which mimics different times of the day. It has sunrise and sunset. After the moonlight setting at night, it will turn off after 2 hours and it'll stay completely dark until the next day for sunrise. Then there is also another function where it's just a 12-hour light. It's just a timer. It will turn on at the time that you set it to, and it will turn off once it hits the 12-hour mark. Now we want to make sure that we're just using the white light to avoid any stress on our hermit crabs or even aggression. Now we want to talk about a heat source. Now we want to make sure that we're offering our hermit crabs a radiant heat, and the only way to properly do that is using a UTH heat mat. Now these are under tank heat mats and they should never be placed at the bottom of our tanks at any time, just because these heat mats do tend to get pretty hot and it will heat up the substrate and can harm a molting hermit crab. So these heat mats are placed at the back of the tank on the outside back wall, at least 1 inch off the substrate so that it doesn't dry out the substrate. Now these heat mats do need to cover 75% of the back wall so it can create the radiant heat that our hermit crabs need. So if our hermit crabs need a certain temperature, they can move throughout the tank and choose what they need at the time. Now, safe numbers for our hermit crabs for both heat and humidity are 75 to 85. Now, our purple pinchers typically are most comfortable in the low 80s, like 81, 82. They seem to be most active and very comfortable in those numbers. Now, if you do have exotic hermit crabs, they do tend to like higher heat and humidity. I keep my exotic tanks, depends on the time of year. Sometimes they will fluctuate from 83 to 85, but I always aim for 84, 85 heat and humidity. Now these heat mats can be found on beanfarm.com and Reptile Basics. On beanfarm.com, you will find a chart where they would suggest the size heat mat that you will need for your size tank. Now, if you have colder winters, you want to make sure that you're getting a heat mat that covers the length of your back wall. Now, these heat mats are reversible. Both sides will produce the same amount of heat, so it really doesn't matter which side you place them on. So now let's talk about substrate. Substrate is the heart of our hermit crab enclosure. So we want to make sure that we're providing the proper substrate for our hermit crabs to safely molt. Now, a lot of these locations where we've purchased our hermit crabs will suggest either calcium sands or all cocoa fiber substrate. Now, with the calcium sands, it can be harmful to our hermit crabs. The reason why I say this, because calcium sand can harden in moist environments. Now we know that our hermit crabs need a completely sealed tank and they will get higher humidity. So the calcium sand will get wet. And this can harden inside our hermit crab's shell and trap them in it. So this will cause stress and it can also harm their exoskeleton. It may damage them. So we want to make sure we're staying away from the calcium sand. Now with the cocoa fiber substrate, cocoa fiber is very loose. It doesn't provide any safety for our hermit crabs when they go down to molt. And being that it's so loose, the other tank mates may be able to sense our molting crabs. During molt, like I mentioned before, they will smell yummy and fishy to the other crabs. We want to make sure that we're avoiding all cocoa fiber. Now, the proper substrate for our hermit crabs would be children's play sand, and we want to make sure that it's only children's play sand and not all-purpose play sand. All-purpose has minerals in them that can harm our hermit crabs. We want to stay away from that. The children's play sand is pre-washed, so it's safe for the crabs. Now, this will be mixed with a proper ratio that I will speak about in a second, right along with our cocoa fiber. You can use the loose bag of cocoa fiber or even the brick. There are different brands out there of cocoa fiber. You can just use whatever you like, as long as it's just cocoa fiber. We don't want to mix any wet substrate together. We can always add moisture if our substrate needs it at the end, but it's really hard to remove the moisture after it's already in our tanks. So this is going to be mixed with 5 parts of play sand to 1 part cocoa fiber. You can use whatever measuring tool you're going to use. If you're going to use cups, you're going to use 5 cups of play sand and 1 cup of cocoa fiber. Now, this does need to be thoroughly mixed, so you don't want any cocoa fiber patches to avoid any blooms down the road. Now, for bigger quantities, you want to mix 1 bag of play sand with half a bag of cocoa fiber or half a brick. So for every 20 gallons of tank, you're going to be mixing 1 bag of play sand to half a bag of loose cocoa fiber or half a brick. Now, the bags that I am using as measuring is the 4-ounce bag. So half of the 4-ounce bag is what you're using. Now, this is only going to give you at least 6 inches in depth. Of course, if you have larger hermit crabs, you want to at least double that in number. So if you want deeper substrate, you will always add an extra bag or 2. Now, in order to keep track of the heat and the humidity in our enclosures, you want to make sure that you have 2 types of gauges. One gauge being a digital gauge that reads the heat and the humidity, and the thermostat that controls the heat mat and reads the radiant heat inside the tank. Now, this digital gauge does need to be calibrated before placing inside your tank. This gauge does need to be located at the center of your tank, off of the substrate, to get an accurate reading. The thermostat does have a probe with a metal tip at the end. This probe needs to be placed next to your gauge. Now, this will have to be at the center, at least 4 inches off the substrate. If you are having a hard time placing the probe at the center of the tank, you can place it on either of the side back walls away from the heat mat, so your thermostat gets a proper reading. So after you place your probe where it needs to be located, you can press the yellow button to set the temperature to what you desire. For the purple pinchers, you can set it at 81, and for exotic hermit crabs, you can set it to 84 or 85. Once the heat hits that temperature, it will shut off the heat mat. And when it goes under the temperature that you had set it to, it will turn back on. Now let's talk about how to calibrate. So we want to make sure that we're getting an accurate reading once we place this gauge inside the tank. Now, how do we do this? You're going to need a small container, a cap from a water bottle, or even a soda cap. It really doesn't matter what kind of cap. You want to fill this up to the top with table salt, and you're going to add 2 or 3 drops of tap water. You're looking for a slushy consistency. If for some reason you add too much water, you can just tip over the cap to allow any excess water to drip out. Once you do this, you're going to place your gauge and the cap of salt inside the container, and you're going to close it with a tight lid, and you're going to place it somewhere you're not going to disturb it for 24 hours. Do not open it before that time. Now, it usually takes 24 hours to get an accurate calibrated number. So now, after calibrating your gauge, we're actually looking for a 75% humidity. If for some reason it is not reading 75%, which mostly all the time it's not 75, you're going to calculate whether it's lower or higher. You're going to calculate that, add or subtract from whatever it's reading inside your tank. Now, for example, if I calibrated my gauge and I removed it after the 24-hour mark and it was reading 74% humidity, then I know that it's actually off by 1. It's 1 number less than what I was aiming for. So now I know that once I place my gauge inside the tank, I need to add 1 to whatever the tank is reading at that moment. So if my tank is reading, the gauge is reading inside the tank 79, then I know that I need to add 1. So it's actually reading 80% humidity. Now you will need several bowls or dishes. So you will need a fresh water pool and also a salt water pool. Both waters you're going to be using from the tap. We like to suggest tap water just because there are so many beneficial minerals in tap water. But in order to make that water safe, we need to make sure that we use dechlorinating drops to remove any heavy metals, ammonia, and even chlorine. And this will remove any of those things and make the tap water safe for our hermit crabs. Now, the type of salt that you're going to use for your saltwater pool will only be marine grade. You never want to use sea salt or table salt or anything like that. It needs to say marine grade salt with no slime coat. Most of us like to use either Instant Ocean or Reef Crystals. There are other brands as well. Then you're going to need a few dishes for your food and for your staples. Now here are a few examples of pools and food dishes. Now, depending on the size of your tank is how big of a pool you're going to need inside your tank. Now, if you're going to use Tupperware, you want to make sure that you're doubling them up to avoid any leaks and also disturbing any molting crabs that may tunnel underneath your pools. All you have to do is remove the top container to do your water changes. There's also critter keepers that you can use for bigger tanks as well. It gives them deeper water. We want to make sure that the pools that we're using are deep enough for our hermit crabs to fully submerge. There are 3D options out there as well. With any of our pools, you want to make sure that we're offering either some bubblers to help keep the consistency of our substrate, the consistency that it needs to be. It also helps cycle the pool, so you will do less pool changes as well. Now, if you're going to do bigger pools for a bigger enclosure, then you want to use filters. And you want to make sure that you're treating all your pools accordingly. If you're not going to be adding bubblers to your pools like the picture shows here, these are just aquarium pumps. They have stones at the end. You want to make sure that you are changing out your pools every 48 hours. Prime does need to be added every 48 hours to any pools that are not filtered. Then you have some options here for food dishes. You can use terracotta dishes or even these pod dishes. This is from one of our approved sellers on Etsy. Now for our pools, we want to make sure that our hermit crabs have easy access in and out of the pools without them getting stuck. So we want to make sure that we're creating some sort of platform or bridge for them to get in and out of the pools without any issues. So we want to give them that access to get out. Now, this can be easily created by using some egg crate. It's actually called light diffusers. You can find at Home Depot or Lowe's, and just cut it to the shape and add some craft mesh over the top with some zip ties so you can hold it all together. Now, all of these things can be found at your craft store or even on Amazon as well. You'll be able to find all of this. For your bottom of your pools, you want to add some friction so your hermit crabs are not slipping and they have some sort of grip. You can add stones or even rocks. Live rock is pretty nice with bigger pools, and flat shells. Now, these flat shells and the rocks also help balance out the pH in your water, so it's all beneficial. Now, hermit crabs by nature are prey animals. Their first instinct is to hide. They are very skittish. You want to make sure that we're offering a lot of safe hides for them. We want to give them that security. So we can use plastic green plants from the dollar store or from your craft store like Michael's, and just decorate your tank, have fun with it. We want to offer lots of natural things inside their tanks so that they feel at home. We want to offer them lots of hides. You can use cork, you can use coconut hides as well. There's so many things out there that you can use for your hermit crabs to feel safe. Now, hermit crabs are nocturnal, so it's normal for them to sleep during the day and come out at night. As they get used to their new environment, they will come out more and explore more during the day as well. Now, as far as food, our hermit crabs need a full balanced nutritional meal daily. Now, a lot of pet store foods like pellets have toxins in them that can make our hermit crabs sick. So we want to make sure that we're staying away from pretty much anything that says hermit crab in a pet store. So we want to offer them a variety of food groups, at least 50% animal protein daily. Now, if you're doing fresh foods, you can do meats, different kinds of meats. You want to make sure that you can offer them raw meats. If you're going to do shellfish, you want to make sure that you're cooking it to avoid any shell rot. Any leafy greens in your vegetables will also need to be cooked, just because dark leafy greens can block the calcium in our hermit crabs, and we know that calcium is very important for our hermit crabs. So we want to make sure that we cook any leafy greens to help minimize that. So vegetables, fruits, we want to make sure we're offering seeds and grains and nuts. Not all seeds, not all nuts are safe for our hermit crabs. We want to make sure that everything we're offering our crabs are unseasoned, no processed or preservatives added. We want to make sure we're looking for single ingredients in everything that we give to our hermit crabs. Now, as far as supplements, which is very important, it's pretty much calcium, which they should have available to them at all times. There are different sources of calcium. For example, you can use eggshells from home. Just crush them up. You can leave it whole. It really doesn't matter. I usually like to put it into a powder form to make it easier for my hermit crab to ingest. You can also use oyster shells in rock form or even powder. I always, like I mentioned, I like the powder just because we know that they can consume it much easier. And right along with Cuttlebone. Cuttlebone you can find at your local pet store in the bird aisle. You can also mix all of these things together to actually make a great mix. Now, important items to also keep in your tank right along with staples at all times would be foraged items. Now, Our hermit crabs live in trees, so they have access to all types of foraged items. We want to make sure that anything that you're offering your hermit crabs, if you are harvesting them yourself, that they are from a pesticide-free location and no traffic in the area to avoid them being contaminated. We do have approved sellers for food and foraged items that do dehydrated meals to make things easy for our crabs. Most importantly, you want to make sure that these foraged items are treated before placing them inside your tank to avoid any bug infestation. But this is pretty much it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this talk and you found it educational. If you guys have any questions, you know that you can find us on our Facebook group. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of CrabCon.